Planning your next post-COVID vacation? Be prepared with the help and expert advice of the Travel Guys.
Hello and welcome to the Travel Guys, our weekly guide to what's happening in the travel industry, what's new, what's upcoming, and various things to do with both long-haul travel, domestic travel, and just generally what's happening up and coming. My guest today, I'm delighted to advise, is my friend Chris Lyons.
Hello,
Hi,
Mike.
Chris. Chris is a Director of World Journeys, specialist travel wholesaler, and Chris will be talking about some of the trips they do, especially one that he's got planned for next year to Cuba, which I think will be a fascinating trip. And I know you've told me before, one of your favourite places in the world.
No question about it, Mike.
Right. Okay, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for your invitation to come on the show today. Look, World Journeys was a company that we established about 14 years ago.
Okay.
And me and my partners involved in the business had all worked for another travel company here in New Zealand. Now, at that time, that company was sold to an Australian organisation.
I remember that, yeah.
And none of us had the inclination to be working for some Australians, so we gave us the impetus to get out on our own. And we started in 2007, right at the beginning of the GFC. Couldn't have been worse timing.
Time.
Exactly, couldn't have been worse timing. But since that time, the company grew exponentially, but also in a very measured and controlled way. And we became the specialist tour wholesaler here in New Zealand. And I should explain that wholesaler means that we sell our products generally to travel agents.
Yep.
We will, of course, deal with people directly, should they choose to deal with us directly, but predominantly we deal through travel agents. And we became the preeminent company in this country to some of the more offbeat destinations, such as Africa, Latin America, the Indian subcontinent, Indochina, and so we've developed a stable of product to those destinations, which until COVID came along and reared its ugly head, saw us doing phenomenal turnover, great repeat factor from our client base. Someone would go to Africa this year, next year they'd go to South America, the year after they would do India. Of course, COVID's knocked all travel businesses, but we as a company kind of foresaw that there could be some fly in the ointment due to whatever, and we'd always kept aside a little war chest, if you like, or a rainy day fund. We've implemented that. We'll get through COVID, and we're just waiting now. We've already got some 2021-22 electronic brochures out. We know that travel's going to bounce back, and we're going to be sitting there waiting to satisfy our client base once again.
Okay, Chris, well, people may be asking, why are we talking about travel long haul now? The borders are closed, there's no set date for it. But I think both, as you mentioned, long haul travel, people will book well at least 12 months in advance, would you say?
They tend to, Mike. Look, perhaps if they're going to Australia or the Pacific Islands, the lead-in time would be less.
Yep.
But for a lot of the longer haul destinations like Europe or Africa or Latin America, wherever, people typically will book 12 months in advance. And in fact, they need to at the moment. At the moment, the airlines and a lot of the travel companies are offering very flexible booking and cancellation conditions.
Yep.
And although we are in a little bubble here in New Zealand, the rest of the world is already starting to open up to travel. I don't know whether you noticed that in the UK, they had some record, now that they have the release of the vaccine to a good percentage of the population, the travel companies are now taking record travel bookings for people leaving in the next 6 to 12 months. What's going to happen is the rest of the world's already starting to do that. And if Kiwis wait now until we're vaccinated and let's start thinking about travelling in 2022, maybe we'll think about that later in the year, they're going to find that a lot of things are already going to be sold out. So now's the time for people to start thinking about what they're going to do in 2022 or 2023.
I couldn't agree more, and surprisingly to me, I read that cruising, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, has taken off. People are booking cruising well in advance.
Well, Mike, we deal with a lot of the private game reserves and lodges in Africa.
Yep.
Already, we're finding difficulty because a lot of people had booked to travel in 2020, deferred to 2021, are now redeferring to 2022. And we're finding difficulty getting accommodation for them in 2022
really?
Already, because, as I say, the rest of the world
Yep.
is starting to open up. And think travel. We know from conversations with our travel agent friends and with friends and clients, there's a good percentage of people are feeling a little bit of kind of cabin fever, and they're wanting to get away. And if clients don't start thinking about when or what they're going to do next year, and they leave it too late, they're going to miss out. And again, another really good reason for people to book right now, because the flexibility is there. Once the world gets vaccinated, that flexibility is going to disappear again.
Because everybody who's been empty for the last 18 months will be desperate to retain every dollar they can.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, well, Chris, we'll come back. I'll just have a brief update on some general news, and then we'll come back and talk about your trips, especially this one to Cuba. I'm really interested to hear. Just briefly on some airline news, I see the Qantas at the Australian border changes, all travelling to Australia must present evidence of written or electronic negative C-19 CPR test results, and it must be taken within 72 hours of departure. I mentioned that, Chris, because I think you read, as I have, the talk of a border opening between Singapore and Australia, and they're talking by July, and by extension, Barron's hoping that July will mean that New Zealand will open to Australia as well.
And look, Mike, going forward, like it or not, you're going to have an electronic COVID passport.
Yep.
A lot of countries are not going to accept you unless you've been vaccinated against COVID-19. And furthermore, the New Zealand government is not going to be welcoming you back into New Zealand if you haven't had that COVID vaccination as well. And I see, look, if I was to make a prediction, I would think that by the end of this year, by the end of 2021, provided you've been vaccinated, you'll be able to travel and come back and not have to go into managed isolation and pay the $3,000 that you currently would need to pay. Look, I'm not the policy setter, but I would say the world's got to move on. We've got to learn to live with COVID.
It has to. So
and so, these COVID passports or electronic passports, they'll be linked as when you arrive into a country, they swipe your passport through a machine. There'll be something of that nature, not the old-fashioned yellow vaccination cards we used to carry around in the old days, because they would be too easy to forge. These days, it'll all be electronic, and the World Health Organization is working on something which I think most airlines will adopt and countries will follow.
You mentioned the old yellow certificate. I remember them vividly, and many older viewers may remember when you travelled back in the 70s or even 60s, you had two things in your pocket. You had your passport and you had your vaccination certificate against smallpox.
Usually the rubber band kept the yellow vaccination certificate inside the back page of your passport.
Correct. Okay, just another couple of things on travel news. I see that Jetstar have extended their credit vouchers through to the end of December 2023. But I think, as we talked about before coming on air, Chris, you said virtually every airline's doing that now. So if you buy through the airline, they'll give you credit right through to December 2023. I noticed too that Qantas have started flights to nowhere, and starting from Australian $737 for a flight and day's outing. It must be a pretty sensational day for that sort of money, but what goes round come round. I can remember vividly in the days of Ansett New Zealand flying, and they had their mystery weekends and mystery flights. They were so popular.
Yeah, they were.
Again, we were talking earlier, and I mentioned this. Chris said, well, people are paying $2,000 to go out and watch the Cup, aren't they?
The America's Cup.
Yes,
they're going out for pay an afternoon. They'll pay $2,000 to go out there.
Exactly.
$700, not so bad.
Not too bad. On the small plane side of things, Chris, I noticed that with surprise, Learjet have finally stopped the last production Learjet. Learjet has come off the production line at Bombardier, who make them. And at one time, they were synonymous with wealth.
Yeah, they were.
It was the Frank Sinatra era.
Or the Tiger Woods or whoever. They flew around in their own private Learjet.
But the Learjet was the predecessor of everything, and that's quite a surprising one. But leads to another interesting article I saw about a plane called, I'm a bit of a plane spotter, and so, as you know, Chris, but I just noticed a plane, and if anybody's interested, you can Google it or YouTube it. It's called the Otto Celera, C-E-L-E-R-A 500L. What makes it extraordinary, it's got the most unusual, like an elongated egg shape. It's got a tiny pusher piston engine at the back, which almost looks like a toy. And the prototype, which is flying now, is a 6-seater executive jet. Not a jet, beg your pardon. But what makes it extraordinary with this tiny little engine, little propeller, is its performance. And these figures may mean a lot to many people, but it's got a range of 4,500 nautical miles. It can go to 30,000 feet. It's got a fuel economy rate which is a quarter of a jet or a plane of its similar size. And but it's a piston engine, which is such an old school way of doing it. But it's revolutionising air travel for small aircraft, and it's going to be extended out to bigger aircraft at one stage. One thing I like though, Chris, I can be a little bit of a nervous flyer from time to time. It's got a glide ratio of 22 to 1, which I read up, it says means that a normal aircraft of its size has got a glide ratio of 7 to 1, so it's going to sink down a bit quicker as if everything turns to custard. This can glide for 130 miles and find a nearest airport. But the Otto Celera 500L, totally different from anything I've ever seen in terms of aircraft, and it could really revolutionise small plane aircraft.
Yeah, well, technology's changing so quickly.
Sorry, the other thing I mentioned is short takeoff and landing. It can land in the very short.
And incredibly fuel efficient.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's a little bit of airline news for us. Now, back to my guest, Chris. Chris, I know we've known each other for many years. I know some of the extraordinary trips you've done over the years, and I've had a few phone calls from you from various places at times in the middle of the night.
Late at night.
When on the phone I hear a click going and I hear this voice say, "My boy, picture the scene." And I'll be saying, "Chris, where are you?" And it'll be Caracas or it'll be wherever. But the one that you did recently, which you fell in love with and you'd like to talk to us today, is your Cuba trip. So please tell us about the trip and what you've got planned.
Well, thanks, Mike. Cuba, I'm lucky enough over the years to have visited well over 100 countries. But when I visited Cuba, it wasn't until 3 or 4 years ago, and it took my breath away. It surprised me. I thought it was just an incredible destination. And as Cuba has opened up more and more, we now run, for clients wishing to travel independently, or if they want to go on a group, we run tour programs to Cuba. There's a few things about Cuba which stand out. One is incredibly good value for money, because a doctor today in Cuba will only earn $40 American per month.
A month?
Per month.
Holy moly.
As a result of that, we get some outstandingly good tour guides. Our favourite go-to is a gentleman called Yaniel, and Yaniel has a master's in English literature, but because being an academic won't earn him as much as being a tour guide, he has become our friend and mentor for many of our individuals that go to Cuba, and we do one group tour, maximum 18 people once a year. We fly from Auckland direct to Santiago in Chile and through to Lima in Peru. Now, why go through South America? Well, it is possible to go to Cuba through the USA, but there is a possibility those air links will close again. So, and in terms of travelling time, it's actually quicker to go through South America than through North America. So we stopped for a couple of days in Lima, Peru. Now Lima, I love Lima. When the Spanish invaded South America or conquered South America, they had two great, what they called viceroyalties. One was in Mexico City, and the other was in Lima. And so Lima was the centre of Spanish civilization in South America. It's incredibly historic, wonderful city, and so we spent a couple of days, helps clients get over jet lag, or perhaps our guests get over jet lag. We give them some sightseeing there, and then Lima to Havana, a 5-hour flight. Once they arrive in Havana, they spend 2 weeks of being looked after by our wonderful guide Yaniel. When they first arrive, we stay in a UNESCO World Heritage listed hotel called the Nacional. Now, in the Nacional Hotel, which was built in the 30s, it used to be the playground for the rich and famous from the Frank Sinatras, the mobsters, the movie stars
Batistas, right.
would come down, and they would stay at the Nacional in Havana. And it's also where Che Guevara and Fidel Castro had their headquarters after they had taken over control of the Cuban government in 1959. The thing about Cuba is that it is to a degree, and it is changing now, but to a degree it is still stuck in 1959. That's seen particularly in the motor vehicles on the road.
Are they still the same?
They absolutely are. There are still, you'll see wonderful old DeSotos and Oldsmobiles and all those vehicles that date from that area, and probably still at least half the cars on the road in Cuba are still pre-1959. As I say, it's changing, and another good reason for people to go there sooner rather than later. So we have a few days in Havana, and Havana is a gem. It's again, the city itself is basically stuck in pre-1959. Wonderful old colonial buildings, beautiful plazas, great music. The thing that I love, and I know you like music, Mike, many people have heard of the Buena Vista Social Club.
Correct.
Doesn't matter where you go in Havana, where you go in Cuba, there's a band playing that often older gentlemen. It's like there's a Buena Vista Social Club everywhere. So
like New Orleans, but less touristy.
Absolutely, and much more authentic. And so there's music, there's great food. There's
cheap, the food?
Yeah, cheap. The food is cheap. You've got to remember that virtually nothing is imported into Cuba because there are sanctions against the country.
It's still going on.
Yeah, it's still going on. So that the food is locally produced.
Yeah.
So we spend a few days in Havana. We then go to the Bay of Pigs, which is a beautiful beach area.
Is it really? It's synonymous with it.
Yeah, where the Americans had that failed incursion into Cuba to try and overthrow Castro in the early 60s.
Idiots.
From there on to Trinidad. Now Trinidad is a wonderful old colonial town with cobbled streets.
So this is Trinidad, not the island of Trinidad.
No, it's not Trinidad. It's probably the second most visited city in Cuba.
Okay.
But it's a small town, beautiful architecture, cobbled streets, a slow pace of life. We spent a few days there, and then from there we head out to a city called Camagüey, which is again another wonderful colonial city. Cuba is full of UNESCO World Heritage listed sites. There are a number of their towns and cities of UNESCO Heritage listed. Camagüey is another one. The streets are little narrow winding streets, and they specifically built them that way to confuse pirates when they came under attack. So you get that kind of the influence of, in the port cities like Havana or Santiago de Cuba, you have massive forts that were built by the Spanish to fend off the likes of the Captain Morgans and the British privateers who were constantly trying to attack them. We include the chance if people want to learn how to dance the salsa. Now, that can sound a little twee, but it's very authentic, and guests absolutely love it because Cuba's a very genuine sort of country. The people are friendly. The experiences are really quite authentic and not massively touristified.
English, Spanish, Creole?
Spanish is the language of the lingua franca there, but English is more widely understood, and the people are this incredible blend of someone with my skin colouring or blonde hair through to the blackest of black African and every blend in between. Wow. And it is really quite a homogenous society. People just live side by side. Mm-hmm. So that people can decompress after a week or 7 or 8 days of travelling, we'll take them to a place called Cayo Coco for a couple of nights, or 3 nights actually. The beach is like white talcum powder. The sea is an azure blue, crystal clear waters, delightful. So they can just have a couple of days to relax and catch their breath. before we then press on to the other end of the island. Now, Cuba's a very large island. It's around about 1,300 kilometres from one end to the other.
Don't think many people are aware of that.
No, it's not particularly wide, but it's extremely long. So it takes you literally about 24 hours to drive the length of the island if you go non-stop.
So in your Oldsmobile or your
Exactly. One of our final stops, or the westernmost extent of the island that we get to, is a city called Santiago de Cuba, and that is really the centre of black African culture in Cuba. It's also the centre of music. There's music everywhere through the country, but the heartbeat of the music is down in Santiago. And so we have some music experiences down there. Again, some wonderful old colonial forts. And then, and you're actually quite close to Guantanamo Bay. So depending which airport we fly out of, there's 2 or 3 airports in that area to fly back to Havana. Often we'll take the clients to Guantanamo Bay. You can just look across the bay to where the base is.
Bay.
And it's interesting, Guantanamo Bay is actually American, if you like, American soil.
Yes.
And the Americans pay a fee to the Cuban government every year. But since 1959, when Castro took over, they've never banked the cheque. The Cubans refused to bank the cheque. But they can't force the Americans out of Guantanamo Bay. So interesting.
Quite bizarre, isn't it, really?
There are some other interesting things. In Cuba, they used to have 2 currencies running parallel. They've actually now just incorporated the 2 of them, but they have a 3 peso note. That's just another, everything's different about the country. But without fail, our guests, when they come back, there are 2 or 3 things that they will write to us or will call us up and comment on. The friendliness of the people, just what a scenic and beautiful country it is. The incredible history in the cities and towns, but we'll always get just rave reports back on our guides, because the guides are outstanding there. It's a brilliant destination.
Is Castro still revered as he was?
He is. Interestingly enough, Castro internally never took on this cult of personality. The person with the cult of personality is Che Guevara.
Who was an avid rugby supporter.
He was, yeah. It's interesting. As part of our tour through the country, we stop at a place called Santa Clara, and that was where there was a very famous battle. It was really the key battle between Castro and Guevara and the regime that they were Batista, who they were toppling. There's a museum at Santa Clara, which is specifically the Che Guevara Museum, underneath his mausoleum. And I was just delighted to read that he was an absolute fanatic on rugby.
Yep.
And when because he's Argentinian, when he was in Buenos Aires at the university there, he actually edited their rugby magazine, which was called Tackle. And so, whoever knew there's a connection between New Zealand and Che Guevara.
Yeah. He wasn't the nicest of people, though, when you read his history.
No,
he had the looks and he had the presence. But
absolutely, but also he's still revered by the Cubans, and you will see large statues of him. You'll see murals of him up on
But not Fidel,
walls.
that's interesting.
But not Fidel at all. Fidel took a back step, and he never wanted to have that cult of personality.
Safety for people travelling?
I would say as close to 100% safe as you can possibly get. It's interesting. When you're driving from A to B, you'll see single women hitchhiking on the
that's a rarity these days, isn't it?
on the highways. It is a rarity because look, there's no question that probably if you step out of line, the penalties can be pretty strict.
Anywhere in the world, though, for goodness sakes.
But they can be strict, and so they do have a relatively lawless society. There are. You wouldn't walk around the very dark streets of Havana late at night.
Like you wouldn't walk around
But
Auckland.
you wouldn't walk around Auckland.
No,
I feel a lot safer in Havana than I do living in central Auckland.
Yeah, okay. Now, when does the tour depart, Chris?
It departs at the end of April in 2022.
Have you got a price yet, or are you not finding
We're working on the price now. the pricing's possibly going to come in a bit cheaper than it was previously. So that price will be confirmed in the next week or two.
Okay. So if anybody's interested, how do they get hold of you, Chris?
Well, they can talk to their travel agent,
of course, yes.
And ask to have details on the World Journeys trip.
Yep.
Remember also that we do host, as well as having the Cuban host, someone travels with the group from New Zealand as well. Or they can contact us at World Journeys on 0800 11 73 11.
11 73 11.
Yeah.
Or
our website's available, worldjourneys.co.nz.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the group travel. Is something like Cuba fine for individual travellers to go to?
Absolutely.
No problems.
But and the beauty about Cuba for individuals, if you're not someone who necessarily wants to travel as part of a group, or you want to include Cuba as part of a more extensive trip, we can supply a car and a driver, and that guide will be yours for the entire time you're in Cuba. They are even happy to come out with you in the evening, take you to places they recommend for music, etc. And the price of doing that is, compared to having a private guide with that level of service almost anywhere else in the world, is phenomenally reasonable. Okay. It's very, very reasonable.
Well, you've made me jealous of that, Dave, mate.
Yeah, people do need a tourist card to get into Cuba, but
you arrange that?
Yes, we have a supply of them. We're with the Cuban embassy, we are a registered supplier of their tourist card, which is like a visa.
Yep, understood.
So if you book arrangements through us, we'll supply you with the visa or the tourist card to get into Cuba.
Okay, Chris, well, thank you so much, mate. You've just made Cuba come alive to me. I almost don't have to go there because you've described it so vividly.
Mike, I know you very well. You have to go there. You would love the music and the whole atmosphere. It'd be fantastic.
But thanks again, Chris. Just that number again, 0800 11 73 11. And my guest has been Chris Lyons from World Journeys. Thanks again for coming in, Chris.
Pleasure, Mike.
Okay, well, that's the travel show for this week. Thanks again for watching, and we'll be seeing you next week. Thanks again.